I'll start this second hour by discussing reports that Saudi Arabia is going to let the 50-year petrodollar agreement with the United States expire. Is the US dollar going to be able to remain the global reserve currency, or are we all, as a planet, looking at something new in the monetary realm with commodity-backed money potentially returning? Here to discuss this, I'm delighted to be joined by Andy Schechtman, President and owner of Miles Franklin Precious Metals. I am genuinely delighted to see you, Andy Schechtman. Thank you for joining us.
Well, the pleasure is mine. Thank you for the invitation. It's fantastic.
This story, Andy, absolutely preoccupies me. I became aware of the petrodollar and I thought it was of huge significance, especially around what was happening in relation to Saudi Arabia. But many, even economists and economy-minded people that I talked to, tried to tell me that there is no such thing as a petrodollar. And there clearly is. So can you, for the beginners, really like myself and others out there, can you give a sense of what the petrodollar is and why it matters?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. The petrodollar has given the United States the ability to live far beyond its means for a very long time. It was a deal that was struck in 1974, 50 years ago, just a few weeks ago, whereby, in essence, for a condition of protection and military assistance with the Saudi kingdom and by extension, OPEC, for valuing oil in dollars globally and recycling any excess in U.S. treasuries, the Saudi kingdom was granted protection from the United States military. And it's been that way literally for 50 years, which has created a massive synthetic demand for the U.S. dollar. In other words, every single country on the planet has had to stockpile dollars in order to buy oil, where nearly 100% of all the oil sales over the last 50 years have been done in U.S. dollars. It is a massive deal. Amongst other things, of course, Saudi Arabia joining BRICS, the BRICS New Development Bank, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And what really got me on this path almost 4 years ago was the realization that every single OPEC country, Saudi Arabia included, is on the Belt Road Initiative. Conspicuously, the West is not. And I would just simply say this is just another nail in the coffin. I call it logarithmic decay, little by little by little by little by little, then bang, all at once. Now, we haven't seen that all at once moment yet. But certainly you could argue the fuse has been lit in that Saudi Arabia now has carte blanche, really, to trade with whomever they want in whatever currency they want for oil without having it to be literally exclusively in U.S. dollars. Big deal.
Why is it happening now?
I think there are several reasons that it's happening now, but the biggest reason of all would be the weaponization of the dollar and the treasury. The United States is viewed by many in the Southern Hemisphere, Neil, as being hypocritical, where Janet Yellen can say to CNN, listen, we're okay with Putin and Xi being friends. Well, thank you very much, Madam Secretary. That's fantastic and benevolent of you, were my first thoughts on that. She said, but if one penny is given to the Russian war machine, we will sanction your banks, your companies in Beijing itself. Never mind the fact that we've given $260 billion to the Ukraine with nary a hair of congressional oversight, including Javelin missiles, F-16s, and the intelligence on where to drop it, where we can go into Iraq 20 years ago. Now, granted, I love this country. I'm a patriot, but what I see is happening breaks my heart. We can go into Iraq 20 years ago under the guise of weapons of mass destruction and say, we're sorry, we didn't find any, but we're still here. We've destroyed your country, really, and we'll help you rebuild it, of course, with our American companies. And but we put in a new regime, and yet we're still here. And sanctioning 20 or 14 of your banks right now for having the audacity to try to buy liquid natural gas using Iranian banks, which are on the do not trade list. And you know, they made $90 billion in oil revenue in 2023. They asked for $1 billion towards the end of the year, and the United States said, not a good time, come back to us in 24. What they have done as a result is formally apply to the BRICS. They are in the process of kicking Western coalition forces out of the country. They have made trading in dollars illegal. If you own a business and trade in dollars, high probability you'll end up in prison and your business taken. And as of January 1st of 2024, There are no green dollar bills in any of the banks in Iraq anymore. In other words, half of the world views this as hypocritical, where we can go around the world making these declarations, these sanctions, and let's just call it what it is. We have confiscated $5 billion in the Russian assets. Now, in your neck of the woods, in the European Union, and I don't know exactly how the UK fits into this, but the European Union has 260 or 70 or 80 billion worth of Russian assets. They've agreed to steal just the interest. In both cases, whether it's the U.S. stealing $5 billion worth of U.S. treasuries, or taking the 280 billion, the interest from it, and using it to buy weapons to give to the Ukraine, the country that you stole from. You're giving the weapons to the country they're fighting in a war. That's a line you cross and you'll never come back from. It is the weaponization of the dollar, the weaponization of the treasury, from what appears to be by many a hypocritical position, and it is not going over well, to say the least. And let's not forget, the United States is creating $1 trillion of debt every 100 days. 1 trillion seconds ago, Neil, was 31,688 years ago. It took us 200 years to do it the first time. We're destroying the value of the dollar through the printing press. And it's a situation that is just unattainable with the continued debasement of the dollar and weaponization of the treasury. The United States is not looked at the way they once were by many of these countries, Saudi Arabia included.
Andy, hold that thought for a second. Jasmine Birtles, it's an extraordinary story.
It is.
I feel hasn't attracted anything like the amount of attention that it ought to have. This is the world swinging on a hinge.
Absolutely.
Moving.
Yeah, it's massive. I mean, I agree with Andy and you. It's a huge story. And the whole idea of the dollar as the reserve currency of the world is evaporating in front of our eyes. As you know, the dollar's been the reserve currency for decades, replacing the pound, boo. And these things do have, it's a cyclical thing. But as Andy says, by confiscating Russian assets, they've basically, I think that plus, the loss of Saudi Arabia, that has just completely cut themselves off and really meant that I think we've just got a few years left now, if that, of the reserve currency being the dollar, because other countries are looking, going, oh, so if we do anything against the United States, they could take all of our assets, could they? However, the question next is what would be the next reserve currency? And I'd be interested to hear what Andy says about this, because it seems to me that we're going into a multipolar world. There isn't one particular currency, including the yen, I think, that would necessarily take over from the dollar.
Andy Schechtman, what would be your estimate on the likelihood of there being another replacement reserve currency, or, as Jasmine suggests, will it be a more of a free-for-all?
Well, I think, first of all, to talk about Saudi Arabia without speaking of the BRICS is a mistake. There was just a meeting in Novograd, Russia, where 59 countries have formally applied to the BRICS on top of the 10 that are already there. And, this meeting had 21,000 attending in 139 nations. And much of what we've seen over the last year was talked about here too, and that's $80 billion of bilateral deals done on the sidelines. So let's first say the first step of the I guess you could say the trouble associated with the petrodollar would be the fact that their settlement is done in all of these local currencies. We've been seeing this nonstop, where Saudi Arabia is selling their oil to China for yuan, which is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And you have to understand that gold was reclassified by the Bank of International Settlements in 2019 as the world's only other Tier 1 reserve asset. We could have another discussion about Gordon Brown and what he did with all of your gold. But the point of it is that the world is now looking at gold, in my opinion, as a replacement for the Treasury bond. And if you go back to 2000, go back for the last almost 25 years, gold has doubled the performance of the 10-year Treasury, while at the same time is an asset that has no counterparty liability. And this is why you're seeing the central banks of the world not only massively accumulate gold, but also, like the Bank of India just did, purchasing 1.5 times the amount of gold in the first 4 months of this year as they did all of last year. But they repatriated that gold and all of the gold held at the Bank of England, over 100 metric tons, because it's not just looking at gold, which has no counterparty liability and has averaged over 9.9% per year for the last 25 years, but repatriating it, which is an indictment of the system. So what I'm getting at is this new BRICS system. In fact, they just announced last week, the head of the BRICS New Development Bank, Dilma Rousseff, had all sorts of meetings with Putin, and it was announced publicly that they have agreed upon a new settlement currency, which will be called the unit. And that unit will be backed 40% by gold, which is what? The only other tier one reserve asset that the central banks have been buying at a level the world has never seen. And I'll tell you, they use the suppression of the gold market on the London Metals Exchange and on the COMEX, which are trading many, many, many multiples of the ounces of gold that they hold in order to, and have been for a long time, to maintain a certain price level to make the Western system seem better than it is. But when these exchanges were designed, these countries in the Southern Hemisphere didn't have the coordination, sophistication, or wealth to stand for delivery. And that's what we are seeing now that's going to change the system. So when you look at the way that these countries, oh, by the way, and 60% of the unit will be BRICS plus currencies. So they're using something called the Project M Bridge, which has been a joint development between China, Hong Kong, Singapore, and the United Arab Emirates. And it is a platform that sidestepped the SWIFT so that there is no ability to sanction these trades. And what it is the ability for these countries to trade in local currencies, right? So they're all going to have their own central bank digital currencies using the Project M Bridge, but there will be one common settlement currency for the BRICS Union, which, as it is right now, you guys, represents the majority of human population, larger swath of global GDP, 2 of the 3 largest nuclear arsenals in the world, way more of the commodities, way more in the shipping lanes, whether it be the Red Sea or the Straits of Hormuz, and on and on and on. And it is a growing union where these countries are finding safety in numbers and a rallying cry pushing against the West. So it will be settlement in local currencies, which chips away at the settlement value of the dollar, and then settling in things or reinvesting the proceeds in things like gold or oil, which I believe across the globe are being remonetized in favor of a treasury which can be weaponized. And if we don't like what you're doing, never mind what we're doing, but if we don't like what you're doing, hey, we're going to take it from you. And we might even give it to the country you're in the midst of a war with to buy weapons and fire them back at you. This is something that is bigger than people think. And you know, the real truth of it is, you guys, and I give you a lot of kudos and respect, because over here, the media doesn't do a poor job of telling us what's going on. They do no job. And most of the people in this country have no idea that the dollar, why the dollar has been the world reserve currency. They don't know that gold has jumped alongside of it as the only other tier one reserve asset. They don't see what is happening. But this growing coalition of countries is something to not I think, take lightly, and to dismiss it as a mistake.
And one of the things that strikes me as extraordinary about it is that I was kind of raised, we're all raised that you see America as the policeman of the world, the good guys, the cowboys in white hats. And yet, in this instance, what's happening here, everyone else, the BRICS nations and all of those prospective members of that entity in the North-South corridor, everyone else is behaving like grown-ups. Everyone else is setting aside all sorts of differences and ideological, divisions and getting on with the business of building and creating. And somehow America has been left has just been left behind.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that. Even mentioning the North-South corridor, there's probably not a person in this country that understands what that is. But these shipping lanes and trade routes are all integral to the Belt Road Initiative as an example. The Belt Road Initiative is the largest infrastructure project in human history, connecting Asia, Africa, South America, and parts of Europe. It represents 75% of human population as it is right now, 50% of global GDP. It's bridges and roads and maritime channels and railways that will be patrolled nothing but by commerce and military. You add that into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the operative word here is cooperation. To your point, there is no coercion. They're cooperating with one another. And the Eurasian Economic Union, which the president of Belarus said, let's get them all into the BRICS. I've been saying that for 3 years and over 3,000 videos I've done on this topic. And that is exactly what is happening. It is a cooperative endeavor where these countries are aligning and putting aside ideological differences because my enemy's enemy is my friend. And I think they realize they have one shot. Look, all of us in the West have ruled the roost for 500 years. And these countries, which have never had a chance to speak on their own, are finding safety and coordination and sophistication together. And it is representing a trend that when it's all said and done, if you put all those groups together, and they are in essence the same groups, the Belt Road Initiative, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which, by the way, Iran and Saudi Arabia have joined. It is the largest regional financial and military organization on the planet. Along with the Eurasian Economic Union, the Belt Road, you're talking 85 to 90% of human population and the majority of all the commodities. There's a man named Zoltan Pozsar, who is one of the smartest guys I've ever known. He used to work at the New York Fed. He works at UBS now. He talks about where we are in this system. Now, to your associates' point, the dollar, which took over for the pound sterling, did so at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, at the end of World War II. That was Bretton Woods 1. Bretton Woods 2 would loosely be when we became the petrodollar in June of 1974. And now he says we've entered a new system called Bretton Woods 3. And that will be based upon transparency and commodities. And if you look at what these countries are all doing, they are finding value in commodities. I would argue that oil is being remonetized as well. Iran just had their largest airport. They awarded a contract to China to have their largest airport remodeled. A couple $1 billion will pay for it in oil. These countries understand that he or she, it used to be he who has the gold makes the rules. Now it's going to be he or she who has the commodities makes the rules. Right along with Saudi Arabia, you have China who bought the London Metals Exchange, which is all the base metals, copper and lead and zinc and whatnot. They're buying up commodities all around the world in a cooperative manner. They come in, they industrialize, they help these countries, enhance their middle class and bring their natural resources to the market and all the benefits that come with it in a cooperative manner. And Saudi Arabia, I think, has decided, not to mention, our president signs an executive order to go green. There's one piece that I'd like to mention real quick, and hopefully I'm not hurting you with time, but the lead economic advisor to the United States government is a knucklehead named Jared Bernstein. And Jared Bernstein's entire thesis, believe it or not, is to lose the world reserve currency. It's a privilege we can no longer afford. Mm-hmm. He's written all sorts of reports about it, the most famous being Dethrone King Dollar. But if you realize weaponizing the dollar, signing an executive order to go green, that is a hell of a good start to pushing Saudi Arabia out of this hegemony fold that has been for 50 years and into a new group that is providing safety and security in numbers. And they're not going green the way that we are.
No.
Andy Schechtman, as far as I'm concerned, this is the biggest story in the world. It beggars belief for me that more people aren't preoccupied with it. And thank you. I can't thank you enough for helping me to better understand it. And I'll look forward to picking this up with you another time because this is a story that's just going to develop and develop. Thank you, Andy Schechtman.